With Ruby and Sapphire, Game Freak scored a second win for the Pokémon franchise, triggering another boom of popularity as a new generation of games captured the hearts of a new generation of gamers. So how are they going to hit the magic yet again? Well, Nintendo had already chosen for them with the arrival of the Nintendo DS, a machine whose capabilities would fit perfectly into the Pokémon puzzle. The first announcement of Diamond version and Pearl version was in late 2004. Emerald version had only recently been released, but presumably development had been started for a while. After all, late 2004 also marked the release of the new handheld in America and Japan, so surely Game Freak already had a development kit in their hands by then. Indeed, Diamond and Pearl were built to take full advantage of the DS's capabilities, which went beyond simply having more powerful hardware. Satoshi Tajiri originally envisioned two friends exploring the Pokémon world, but with the system's ability to connect to the internet, physical distance was no longer a deterrent. You could now battle, trade with, and piss off your friend on the other side of the world. And even better, the backwards compatibility with the Game Boy Advance opened up the possibility for players to bring their Generation 3 companions into a brand new world. The plan was to have the games ready in 2005, but this didn't quite work out due to Game Freak being in the middle of finalizing various aspects of the gameplay. So instead, Japan stepped into the Region of Sinnoh in September of 2006. America and Europe had to wait until April and July of 2007, however, perhaps because the initial Japanese release had a few potentially nasty glitches. But what do you know, glitches or no glitches, it was super successful yet again. Everyone was coked up on it, from the little kids who didn't know what a Pikachu was, to the teenagers and adults whose brains had been permanently tainted by a monochrome text box saying "Wild Zubat appeared." I was part of that second group. I wasn't a kid when I first played Diamond and Pearl, so I don't have any childhood nostalgia for them. But I do have teenager nostalgia, and a whole friggin' lot of it. The games begin with Professor Rowan welcoming you to the world of Pokémon. After picking your protagonist and the name of your caffeine-powered rifle, you're then greeted by a news report about a certain strangely colored Gyarados, before gaining control and heading downstairs. Mommy tells you that your frenemy is looking for you, so off you go to his house when he thuds you at the entrance. After going back for something and financially threatening you, it's time to leave your hometown of Twinleaf to head for the nearby lake in search of unusual Pokémon like that Gyarados. Sounds easy enough. Over at the lake, Professor Rowan is examining the lake together with the protagonist you didn't choose, who serves as his assistant slave. They leave a few moments later, but it seems that the assistant hasn't had their daily whipping yet, since they forgot the briefcase. You and your friend decide to check it out, but that requires crossing the tall grass, and as luck would have it, a pair of birds suddenly attack. But rather conveniently, inside that briefcase is a trio of Pokeballs containing the game's starters. Turtwig, the grass turtle, Chimchar, the fire chimp, and Piplup, the water penguin. Once you've chosen your balls and pounded a Starly, the assistant comes back to get the briefcase, but oops, the cat is out of the bag. On the way back to town, you two are stopped by the professor, who then takes a good look at your starters before running off without a word. After heading back home and discussing what happened, Mommy suggests going to the professor's shack in Sandcham Town, so you can explain what happened. After another thud, the professor understands that you have been taking good care of your starter, and formally gives it to you as a gift. And that leads to his true proposition, which is the ever-present mission to catch them all. He entrusts you with a Pokédex, so that you can record data on the Pokémon you encounter, and with that, your adventure through Sinnoh truly begins. And boy, where do I even start? I love Sinnoh, and I think it's much for the same reasons I love Johto. If I had to describe the region, rural countryside would be what comes to mind, but that isn't doing it justice. In a way, Sinnoh is a mix of previous regions, with locations that wouldn't be out of place in them. You've got quiet places like Pastoria City and Celestic Town, but then you have bigger cities like Jubilife, which hosts many important services, or Sunnyshoire, which serves as the region's main port town. And let's not forget Canalave, a city split by a canal and with more than a passing resemblance to a scrapped concept for Johto, or Snow Point, which is covered in thick snow and has to be accessed by braving a blizzard. Whether it is from design or because the hardware allows it, the scale of the world feels bigger. The first two towns seem like the same size as always, but places like Jubilife and Sunnyshoire seem quite large, in part thanks to the verticality of the world, and in part thanks to how much stuff there is to discover. Sinnoh has some of the most dense areas in the series, and you won't see everything in your first trip, since routes are chock full of little passages to explore, and this exploration element is one that peaked in the DS era, before taking a nosedive starting with the 3DS games. Maybe Sinnoh can seem derivative at a first glance, because it doesn't immediately scream personality like Johto or Hoenn, but I think that's one of its appeals, with frequent reminders that yes, the other regions do exist. The callbacks aren't just nostalgia bait, they help connect all regions as one consistent world. Gen 4 also started the trend of gym leaders being more involved with the region, making their title more meaningful than just being the designated boss battles. Sinnoh also has a lot of mountain areas, and at the center is Mount Coronet. This is a massive mountain linked to many parts of the region, and with a very important role to play in the story, once again involving the box legendary and a team of pricks who want to use its power for mild annoyances. Diamond gets Dialga, a four-legged beast that controls time, and Pearl gets Palkia, a giant penis monster. But unlike previous games, most of Team Galactic is played for laughs. Team Rocket was a straightforward criminal organization, and Team Agua and Team Magma tried to make a point but simply came off as complete morons. Team Galactic's grunts are also morons, but this time the game is fully aware of that, letting the world keep its generally light-hearted tone. Generally. They're a bunch of useful idiots who don't know what they are doing, which contrasts with their leader. Cyrus is one of my favorite antagonists in the series, especially in Platinum, where he gets a bigger role and a bit more character development if you dig around for it. And his battle theme is just awesome. It's not going to blow your pants off, but for me the only critical flaw with it is that it falls into the usual trap of telling but not showing. This is the Pokémon world, it's as happy-go-lucky as you can get, so Cyrus's reasoning for his actions do feel at odds with the generally light-hearted tone. Also, he does that thing where he is an asshole but gets a Crobat. I'm sure that someone has written a 20-page essay about this. I'd also like to put a spotlight on the visuals. The games use a mix of 2D sprites and 3D models, which certainly aren't the most impressive and sadly only run at 30 FPS, but are still quite appealing to me. The real highlight is the return of the day and night cycle, which now also includes an afternoon time with a soft orange tint. There's no night version of the wild Pokémon music like in Gen 2, but I don't think there's room to complain when instead you get night versions for every route and city. Maybe not everyone cares about it as much as I do, but I find that it enhances the atmosphere of both daytime and nighttime. The rest of the soundtrack is mostly excellent, and it contributes to Sinnoh's personality. Its music is as varied as the environments, going from relaxed countryside tunes to energetic battle themes and that fantastic music from Sunnyshore, and to the calm, thoughtful tracks of places like Canalave, and especially the piano solo on the Pokémon League. What, you thought you would get something heavy and dramatic? Dude, you've traveled all over Sinnoh, you've beaten a terrorist organization, and you defeated all gym leaders. I mean, what's another 5 trainers, right? No pressure. Just take a deep breath and step forward. Oh, you asshole! Really, there are a few tracks that stand out not because they're bad, but because they're so bland compared to everything else. The most notable example is the Gym Leader battle theme, which is so utterly average that it clashes with the other high-energy battle themes. As for the gameplay, the basics are pretty much what you've come to expect. Explore the world, gather info, overcome obstacles, and crush the dreams of youngsters with your party of animals that breathe fire and shoot laser beams. You can carry 6 Pokémon with 4 moves each, and their stats determine how fast they attack and how much damage they cause and receive. Battles are turn-based, with both sides attacking until one falls over. Winning battles will earn the Pokémon some experience points, letting them level up and grow in strength, learn new moves, and sometimes even evolve into new forms. Pokémon can also equip hold items, and each species also has 1 or 2 abilities that provide passive bonuses, such as reducing the enemy's attack stat when they enter the battle. Single battles are the majority, but Diamond and Pearl do feature some double battles. They also introduce a few short sections where you team up with an NPC, letting you have double battles with wild Pokémon, which is a first for the series. Catching wild Pokémon continues to work the same. First you beat them up as much as possible, and then you plaster their face with balls until they accept their fate as your slaves, I mean friends. The difference is that you are incapable of targeting Pokémon unless there's only one remaining, so you'll have to knock out one of them first in double battles. And yes, the effort value and individual value systems continue to exist, and have only become slightly more tolerable. I'll get to those later. More importantly, Generation 4's crowning achievement is one of the biggest gameplay changes the series has ever seen: the physical and special split. Up to this point, moves were considered physical or special depending on their type. Some, like normal and flying type moves, were always physical, and thus always used the attack and defense stats to calculate damage. Others, such as fire and ice, were always special, so damage was calculated using special attack and special defense. Well, that was thrown down the toilet where it belongs, because now each individual move can be physical or special regardless of its type. I can't even begin to explain how good of a change this was. You might be aware of the so-called same type attack bonus, or stab for short. Simply put, if a Pokémon uses a move of its own type, that move gains 50% more power. That's a pretty big bonus, so you really want to take advantage of it as much as possible. The problem was that there were many cases of Pokémon with a physical type, but stats inclined towards the special side, or vice versa. So while you could still use them, it would be suboptimal. Gyarados is a classic example, being a water type with high attack and low special attack. But thanks to the split, Gyarados can now properly enjoy its water-type stab bonus to deal massive damage with Waterfall, which is now physical and gained a 20% chance of flinching the opponent. This means that Waterfall now has a reason to exist in battle, rather than just being Surf but worse. Of course, a few Pokémon did suffer a bit with this change. The elemental punches being physical gives many Pokémon with high attack some excellent type coverage, but others such as Alakazam and Gengar can no longer take advantage of them as well as they used to, since their attack stat is pretty mediocre. But these cases are the minority, and it's not like they didn't get other new options as well, so it's insignificant compared to all the possibilities brought about by this split. Possibilities made real by the increased variety of moves and the expansion of those available to each Pokémon. Generation 4 is when movesets really started opening up, and when every type finally got good offensive options for both physical and special-oriented Pokémon. This was done by adding a truckload of new moves, some completely original, some being variations of existing ones, such as Aqua Jet being a water-type version of Quick Attack. Sure, some of these are a low-hanging fruit, but it's overall a great addition. To accommodate this, the existing lists of moves learned through Level Up were also squished down a bit. The result is that Pokémon not only learn more moves by simply leveling up, but they also tend to learn more moves of a wider array of types, both from leveling up and from breeding. The main takeaway from this is that cases of Pokémon that relied on the single-use TMs to have a decent set of moves have been reduced. We would still have to wait another generation before the TM problem got fixed, but it did at least get improved. Plus, now you have 100 TMs in total, rather than just 50. It is true that there's an argument to be made that these changes have increased variety at the detriment of specialization, with Pokémon nudging just a little bit towards being jacks of all trades. But thanks to all the existing mechanics and the way they interact with one another, there's still an insane amount of individuality and options available to the player. And there's no denying that these changes made many unfortunate Pokémon a lot more viable, both in single player and in the competitive scene. But the wonders of Generation 4 don't end there. Besides the usual addition of new items and new Pokémon, some side content from Generation 3 has been brought back, along with some completely new stuff. The berries are back, with their effects fully intact. But Pokéblocks have been replaced with Puffins, which work the exact same way. Contests continue to exist too, letting you command your party for entertainment rather than cockfighting. Contests now also have fashion items, which can be attached to uncomfortable places on your Pokémon in a misguided attempt at making them more presentable. One of the coolest new features is the Underground, a multiplayer maze of dirt, walls and treasure. You can access it from anywhere outside, and thanks to the DS's wireless connectivity, any nearby person who also enters it will appear in your game. Down here you can create your own secret base and play some minigames, but the main appeal is to smash walls for treasure. On the map, you can see sparkles, which indicate that there is something there. Touch the screen to ping the nearby area and then find the right place to start digging. There's an element of luck, but deep down you can think of this as a puzzle game. You know how many treasures are there, but you don't know exactly where they are. You have to measure the places where the items are and avoid as much unnecessary damage as you can. You get a hammer and a pickaxe, which you must use to dig out the items before the wall collapses. The hammer is more powerful, but causes more damage to the wall, while the pickaxe is more precise. You can do this alone, but if anyone else is nearby, their attempts will also apply to your current site, but without weakening the wall. The most common items are spheres, which can be traded for cosmetic items, but you can also find rare stuff like fossils, so while it's obviously intended to be played with others, it's still useful if you have no friends, like me. It's simple but very addicting, and if they made an entire game about this, I'd play the balls out of it. Another nifty addition is the Pokémon Watch, or Pocketch for short. This little dinky-do takes advantage of the dual screen setup by displaying various bits of information on the bottom screen. It starts off with only a handful of apps, but talk to the right people and you'll discover more. Some of them are basic stuff like a clock. but there's others like the dowsing machine, which replaces the old item finder with a radar. Even searching for hidden items is fun when it's this simple and easy. Of course, a few of them are completely friggin' useless, but it's a great way to use the second screen. In a way, it's an evolution of the Pokégear from Generation 2, although unfortunately the phone calls and the radio don't return. Though you do get the VS Seeker, if you feel like crushing youngster Tristan's hopes and dreams again. Generation 4 also avoids cutting backwards compatibility like Generation 3 did. Normally, the DS's second cartridge slot is used to play Game Boy Advance games on your DS, but Diamond and Pearl take advantage of it to migrate Pokémon from any Generation 3 game. This is done through the PAL Park, where you select 6 Pokémon to transfer and then catch them with a special 100% success ball. Of course, this being Game Freak, they just had to have some arbitrary stupidity, which in this case is a limit of 6 Pokémon per day. But hey, at least it's there, and they lifted this restriction in the Johto remakes. Having a Generation 3 game simply inserted in the second slot also comes with the bonus of making certain wild Pokémon appear in some areas, expanding your available choices. And of course they could have also just made those Pokémon appear there without any requirements, but this is par for the course from the same franchise that normalized splitting one game into 2 full-priced ones. Either way, once you're done with the story, you have the Battle Zone, which features some extra single-player content set in an island separate from mainland Sinnoh, as well as a number of facilities, the main one being the Battle Tower, where you get to try out competitive battle rules against the AI, and win battle points that can be traded for useful items and TMs. It's not as interesting as Generation 2's post-game, or as complex as Emerald's Frontier, but being the kind of person who doesn't give a toss about competitive battling, I do enjoy the Battle Zone. But if you do like competitive battling, Generation 4 kicks things off with the Nintendo Wi-Fi Surface. Once you get a badge, you can enter the Global Trade Center, where you can battle and trade Pokémon with anyone in the world without dinky little cables. Or at least you used to. Unfortunately, the Surface was closed down several years ago. The good news is that fans have created alternatives with full online functionality. Obviously, the community is only a fraction of what it was back in the DS days, but the possibility is there, and you might just find what you're looking for. You can trade and battle with specific people by registering their friend code, but you can also put up your Pokémon up for trade in exchange for the Pokémon you want in return, and anyone can accept that and send you what you want. Well, mostly. Back when the Wi-Fi Surface was still on, it wasn't uncommon to see people ask for legendaries in exchange for Bidoofs and stuff, or putting up shiny Pokémon in exchange for legendaries at levels that can't be obtained legitimately, just to show off. But the people who used the Surface properly were absolute heroes, helping the community easily access version exclusives or starters. The problem of having to find 2 versions of one game just so you could get a version exclusive was basically a non-issue now. The competitive community could thrive, and those time sink mechanics like effort values actually had some value now. On top of that, the distribution of special Pokémon was made very easy and simple. I live in a dinky little island. I don't have Pokémon centers or Toys R Us or whatever over here, so the old method of going to a specific kiosk at a specific place was never an option for me, which was patently unfair. This all sounds pretty great, but Diamond and Pearl are also victims to some rather great problems. You can already guess some of the usual suspects, like HMs growing to a more cursed 8 in total. Newcomers include Rock Climb, which lets you climb rocks, and Defog, which decided to take Flash's role as the biggest waste of space, since that's a TM now. Honorable mention to the usual situation of having two versions with minor differences that only exist for money money money. I don't think I need to go any further since this horse has long been ground into a fine paste, much like my hopes and dreams after the remakes. Now let's get the most common complaint out of the way. Yes, Diamond and Pearl are slow. Tetraplegic dogs slow. Gen 3 already pushed it, but Diamond and Pearl take the cake and smash it with a giant dildo. As much as I love the series, this is when it became obvious how outdated parts of its presentation are. I don't need a text box to tell me that a Pokémon's stats were changed one by one. Just show a little animation or something. The awkward pauses in battle continue to exist, but now you've got things like the HP bar depleting or recovering more slowly than necessary. In fairness, situations like Blissey are extreme cases, but the problem is there, and it gets worse as the story progresses. What truly grinds my clinks is that there are cheat codes that speed up these things, which could very damn well have been an option available to players. It's at moments like these that I can't help but wonder what kind of fast backwards logic the people at Game Freak live by, because holy crap, that ass went on a marathon from here on planet Earth all the way to the depths of Alpha Centauri. The sluggishness continues outside of battle, with random stuff like saving the game taking a long time, or the snow on swamp thingies that seemed sort of cool at first, but quickly become annoyances. Surfing is also dreadfully slow, although thankfully there is a lot less water than in the Hoenn games. I guess the good part about all this is that if the biggest problem with a game is not being able to play it fast enough, that speaks a lot about the rest of the game, which is great. For the most part. Game Freak seems to have a bone to pick with fire Pokémon, because if you're not Kanto Lizard, Barracat or Foot Bunny, you probably got the short end of the stick at some point. Wink wink Flareon Flareon. Diamond and Pearl take that to a whole new level by having Sinnoh's regional Pokédex feature a grand total of 5 fire Pokémon. Here, count them yourself if you don't believe me. This causes embarrassing situations like the Elite Four's Fire Specialist only having 2 fire Pokémon on his team. The cherry on top is that 3 of them are the Chimchar line, which can only be acquired by picking it as a starter or by trading. You can find a few more, but only after getting the national dex. Oh yeah, and a decent chunk of all the new Pokémon also can't even be found until the post-game. And to balance out all the good stuff, Generation 4 was also the one that introduced Stealth Rock, a move with implications so far and wide that the competitive scene still feels them to this day. Pokémon with a weakness to the rock type dreaded its existence as every team began carrying Sneaky Pebbles, causing them to instantly lose 25% of their HP just by entering the battle. For the less fortunate ones with a double weakness, half of their HP was instantly gone. Yes, Volcarona is one of my favorite Pokémon, how could you tell? The meta was instantly over-centralized around incognito boulders, and overnight it single-handedly crippled many Pokémon, which is the exact opposite of what the physical special split tried to achieve. This is mostly relevant for competitive battling, so it shouldn't bother me as much as it does. But, well, it does. And yes, later generations tried to nerf it, but much like with effort values, it feels like an attempt at patching up the damage that was caused when these mechanics were first introduced. Speaking of which, effort values and individual values have been made slightly more tolerable. If you're not familiar, I explained it in detail on my Gen 3 video, but here's a quick rundown. Individual values range from 0 to 31, and the higher each stat's individual value is, the higher that stat will be. Effort values are acquired by defeating Pokémon in battle, up to a maximum total of 510, and a maximum of 255 in each stat, which can be distributed among all of them. On paper, it's a pretty ingenious system that elevates the series into a pretty complex competitive game. The problem here, and it's a pretty friggin' big problem, is that the game doesn't tell you a single thing about IVs or EVs. Not only do you have to calculate and keep track of them manually, but it's also a huge boring time sink. And don't get me started on natures and abilities. Diamond and Pearl attempts to lessen the chore with the introduction of the power items, which quadruple the amount of EVs of a specific stat earned in combat. And there's a counter-app for the Pokétch, which is at least something, I guess. But you still don't know what EVs you get from each Pokémon, and you don't know how many your Pokémon has, and screw you for wanting to know the numbers in a game built around those numbers. As for nitpicks, the touchscreen isn't used for box management, which was an obvious missed opportunity that promptly got fixed in the Johto remakes. The text on the move screen in combat could also be a bit better, but I'm just grasping at straws at this point. Lastly, I'd just like to dedicate a poem to the fair lady Mindy, the most crafty of NPCs, who lives in a cozy little house located in Snowpoint City. Pokeballs are red, Great Balls are blue. Thanks for the Haunter. Oh, fuck you. Anyway, the good thing is that some of the problems with Diamond and Pearl are things that can be easily fixed. And that's what Platinum version did, improving on them in pretty much every way. Like with Emerald in Gen 3, when fans talk about how great Gen 4 was, Platinum has a lot to do with it. The overall story remains more or less the same, but the game now starts with a news report about Professor Rowan returning from Kanto, and your rival inviting himself into your room with an amazing idea. Go to the professor's lab and ask for Pokémon directly. Luckily, he stops that dingus before he commits the age-old tradition of Pokémon-assisted suicide. And after talking with you two, he takes the gamble of giving you a starter Pokémon. The main change is that the Alga and Penis Head no longer have the spotlight, with the cover legendary now being Giratina, a cute bundle of edge with power over antimatter. God, it's so friggin' edgy, I love this thing, and it gets one of the coolest scenes in the entire franchise. Team Galactic continues to be a bunch of useful idiots, but Cyrus finds himself interested in the powers of Giratina. It doesn't end very well for him. Or does it? See, these shenanigans lead the player into the distortion world, where the laws of physics drank one too many bottles of wine. You've got platforms floating in the air, waterfalls going upwards, and a constant feeling that something is very, very wrong. It's short, but it serves to expand the characters involved. Particularly Cyrus, who no longer just disappears forever after you ruin his plan, and for once shows a brief moment of weakness as Giratina goes to give him a hug. But the thing is, Cyrus doesn't give a toss about being stuck in the distortion world, because this world of nothing, this world without the human spirit is exactly what he wanted. Not a very usual development in a Pokémon game. Other new story elements include a short detour in Canawave City and that Walker guy who is an international crime fighter investigating Team Galactic, and who seems to be ham-fisted into every other game nowadays. Does anyone even like this guy? But that stuff is for you to discover on your own time. Meanwhile, there's other stuff to talk about. First of all, yes, Platinum improves the speed of the game, but doesn't completely fix it. Surfing is significantly faster, and so is battle speed, which is the biggest problem. The HP bar, however, is still pretty much the same, but it's also a situational thing, not a constant problem like the battle speed. You might also notice that important trainers now have intro animations, and many Pokémon got new sprites. Some overworld graphics were altered as well. As for gameplay, the core mechanics haven't changed at all. What has changed is the balance. Platinum attempts to fix the Pokémon distribution by increasing Sinnoh's national dex up to a more complete 210 Pokémon. Naturally, this means more species of Pokémon to find, and the lack of fire types has been somewhat alleviated. Ponyta can now be found as early as before the first gym, and in fact, it even got a few changes to its level up moves, with Flame Wheel being a very welcome addition. Some evolutions of older Pokémon are also more easily acquired, such as Gliscor and Weavile, but at the same time, Platinum is harder in general. Pretty much every trainer in the game has had their levels slightly increased, with the only notable exception being the Elite Four. These were actually lowered a bit instead, but their rosters were updated to take advantage of the expanded decks, and they now also have a second, much more challenging lineup for rematches, which are unlocked after completing the story segments on the Battle Zone. Some gym layouts have also been altered, and the order in which you tackle a couple of them is different. But more importantly, the Battle Zone now includes a place called the Battleground, where you can have rematches against the leaders with high-level teams. The Battle Zone itself has gotten a number of changes, some superficial, some big. The entire place got a facelift that gives it a more tropical look, separating it from mainland Sinnoh. Parts of the layout itself were also adjusted to incorporate new stuff like the battleground, as well as the villa that you can decorate, letting you create your own special place. But I already know what you're here for. Yes, the Battle Frontier project has been finished here in Sinnoh, so if this was your jam back in Emerald, rejoice. Sinnoh's Frontier follows the same concept. You have various facilities with different challenges, and your goal is to score the biggest winning streak that you can. Successful runs will award you battle points, which can then be traded for goodies like items or TMs. This time there's only 5 facilities, but I don't think anyone will miss the Battle Dome or the Battle Palace. The first two are the regular Battle Tower and the Battle Factory, returning from Emerald. The Battle Tower is a series of regular battles with competitive rules, while the Factory gives you a random set of Pokémon and lets you replace one of your own with one of your opponents. The other 3 are completely new to Sinnoh's Frontier. The Battle Arcade follows the regular setup of 7 battles with 3 Pokémon each. However, Pokémon begin with no hold items, and before each battle, a roulette starts spinning and the tile it lands on triggers different effects, such as causing status problems or causing damage to you or the opponent. The Battle Hall twists that setup of 7 battles with 3 Pokémon and instead has you fight sets of 10 1 vs 1 battles. The gimmick here is that you have 10 ranks of battles against each of the game's types, and you can select which one to fight against. You can do all 10 ranks of one type at once if you want, but you can also mix different types together during your run. The thing is that each rank gets progressively harder, and you must pick the same Pokémon you started with in order to continue your winning streak. So you will have to fight the types that have an advantage against your Pokémon at some point. This is where the choice of whether to get rid of those as soon as possible or to get as high a streak as you can before touching the dangerous types comes in. Last but not least is the Battle Castle. The battles themselves are standard, but unlike the other facilities, your Pokémon do not recover between battles, and they start without hold items. However, victory will earn you castle points, which can be spent on different things, such as healing and hold items, or on different effects like lowering the level of your opponent. It's a twist on the formula where half of the strategy comes from external decision making rather than combat itself. This makes the Battle Castle very replayable and addicting, and it is certainly the most interesting facility on offer. In fact, I find Platinum's Frontier as a whole to be a lot more enjoyable than its predecessor. Firstly, because of the big gameplay changes in Gen 4, but also because all 5 facilities are engaging and fun, and because getting anywhere takes less time, both figuratively and literally. The entire frontier is neatly packed together instead of scattered on a large island, and you get more battle points to spend and a bigger variety of rewards. The only real loss compared to the previous frontier is the lack of anything like the battle pyramid, which included exploration elements rather than just battles. I don't care about competitive battling, but it is an area that Gen 4 expanded further, and unlike Emerald's situation, the battle frontier here actually has something to offer for someone like me. Competitive battling is no longer a total waste of effort, and the battle frontier complements your efforts perfectly, because it's just as brutal as it was in Emerald. Now, if I had to point out the problems with Platinum, I'd basically just have to mention that it doesn't go far enough in a few aspects. One is how Sinnoh supposedly got hit with a wave of cold, which is why the protagonists have new outfits of dubious effectiveness. In practice though, all it means is that there's a few sprinkles of snow in a few locations. The only place with a proper dose of snow is Snow Point, which was already covered in snow. Similarly, the Distortion world is cool as balls, but you only visit it once, and you could argue that it's a glorified walking simulator since there's no Pokémon or items to find, just a handful of puzzles and a fight against Giratina. Sadly, the concept has only sort of been revisited in the Alola games. Also, thanks European Union for permanently screwing over the game corner because of gambling regulations, that apparently don't matter anymore given all the games with literal gambling mechanics that involve actual real money instead of some fictional currency that lets you buy useful items. Thankfully, Platinum still lets you buy coins with money, but the Johto remakes weren't so lucky. But all in all, Platinum is fantastic, and easily one of my favorite games in the franchise. Some of Diamond and Pearl's flaws were things that could be easily fixed, and that's exactly what happened with Platinum. Once again, like with Emerald before it, you can just play Platinum and ignore the other two. Which is something that I can't say about the remakes. Yes, I'm going there. If you want to hear me talk crap about games I haven't played, this section is for you. When rumors of Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl were coming, I was excited as hell, because even with all the controversy surrounding Swooshy, I've been waiting for so long to see a reimagined Sinnoh. And then the trailer dropped, and any excitement I had was launched into the burning sun, because it was like the games were holding a Neverstone. Though Legends does at least look interesting. My problem with these remakes can be summed up in one word. Why? The selling point is that these are faithful remakes, but the only meaning I've derived from that thus far is that they haven't done much beyond the absolute bare minimum. The expanded underground looks great, the inclusion of trainer customization is always cool, and one thing that thankfully hasn't remained faithful is that HMs don't require being taught to your Pokémon. But besides that, it looks like it really is just Diamond and Pearl but sponsored by Funko Pops. It keeps the grid-based movement, and apparently even the script is exactly the same as the one used in the original games. For some godforsaken reason, the games are also going back to single-use TMs, except they give you a couple of them instead. The reason I wanted remakes was so I could finally see Sinnoh from a fresh new perspective. For all their problems, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire offered an experience that was different from the original games, and they somewhat made up for their flaws with new plot points, mechanics like Mega Evolutions, and a decent amount of completely original content. It seems like BDSM doesn't have anything like that, nor does it have the Platinum content. Though these are remakes of Diamond and Pearl, not Platinum. My mistake for expecting those things. What's the point if it's just a repeat of the originals but with some updated mechanics? If I just wanted an updated Gen 4, I'd go replay Renegade Platinum, which works around the single-use TMs, rebalances movesets and Pokémon, removes a lot of HM annoyances, and even adds the Fairy type. Sure, it lacks Pokémon from later generations, but so do these remakes. They also don't have Mega Evolutions, Z-moves or Dynamax, and unlike the first 3 generations, Gen 4 already has many of the key gameplay changes, such as, the physical special split, plus it actually has the Platinum content. Even the simple fun of seeing how the Pokémon look in a new generation isn't there anymore, because the games have been recycling the same models and animations since 2013. To be fair, from what I've read, the post-game rematches are genuinely tough, with rosters featuring Pokémon with perfect IVs and EVs and excellent items, abilities and moves. But not only is that a small portion of the game, it's also something that, again, I can already get from playing a ROM hack. And this is also assuming that the difficulty during the rest of the game won't only be appropriate for a toddler with Alzheimer's. Which, yeah, it will be, because these games are never properly balanced for the XP share. And this time you don't even have an option to turn it off, so that terrible excuse can't be made anymore. All of this is to say that Generation 4 might technically be outdated, but the changes it made continue to leave their mark on the franchise, and Platinum has barely aged a day since it first launched in 2008. This is what peak performance looks like. Sinnoh is a joy to explore, and despite lacking a handful of things, it brought back so many things I loved about previous games, while simultaneously adding its own stuff. In fact, I barely scratched the surface. I haven't even talked about those juicy beta leaks. The physical and special split also positively changed the way many Pokémon were used, both in single player and in the competitive scene. With a few of the tweaks from Generation 5, I almost wish that the DS era had never died, and that Pokémon had never moved on. Look, I don't hate Generation 6 and 7, but between Platinum, the Johto remakes and the Unofo duology, the possibilities as to where the franchise would go next spread beyond the horizon. Whereas nowadays, it seems like we have to keep expectations in check, because Game Freak is just a small indie studio. Back then, Generation 4 really felt like a straight-up evolution for the series, and a natural progression of what we previously had. I wasn't concerned about the Pokédex being sliced in half, or that the graphics were going to look like Total S compared to everything else on the system, or that there wouldn't be setbacks because Game Freak couldn't program their balls out of a Visbus exercise. If you're experiencing Sinnoh for the first time today, it might seem quaint compared to what came after it, but much like my attachment to the Johto games, I hope I've managed to convey why I hold these games with sometimes questionable design decisions in such high regard. Diamond and Pearl in particular suffered from significant problems, but its good points shine brighter than its flaws. If you're a new fan who started with later generations, or someone who skipped the DS era, I urge you to give Platinum a shot. Generation 4 marked the arrival of a bright new era, a refinement for what was already there, and the establishment of building blocks that would be used for decades to come. And that is my own second nostalgia.